through a grueling first day, and I am pleased to confirm to you that there were still folks engaging on some key debates at 8 p.m. last evening. So it was a good first day, long, tiring, but rewarding. And I promise you today will be slightly shorter, more interesting, and more intimate in this particular venue. So we will have a chance to engage with all of you more robustly. We are going to be, please follow your programs closely. There are sessions hosted in the green room and the white room. So please look at the color coding of the panels and please follow those colors. And of course, you've seen the two rooms are located, the white room is located below this particular venue, so you can get there as well. There's a staircase that connects you, elevators that take you. Now, with that housekeeping announcement, let's start with the first session, which is on artificial intelligence, a boom for emerging markets, and that's a question. And that question is going to be answered by some very interesting speakers this morning. But let me first invite Sheila Palin, Senior Human Rights Consultant, United Nations, who will moderate this session. Sheila, can you join us on stage? Let me at this time also invite Minister Terr-Petrosyan, Minister for High Tech and Industry, Armenia, to join us on stage, sir. Let me invite Rohit Bansal, Group Leader, Reliance Industries Limited, India, to join us on stage to speak as well. Let me invite Anush Kambarian, Vice President of AI Engineering and Operations, Piskat, Armenia, to join us on stage. And let me invite Huda Al-Kazmi, Founder and Director, MR's Tech, Center for Emerging Technologies from United Arab Emirates. Huda, you are welcome. And finally, my favorite tech speaker, Mallory Nodal, Founder and Executive Director of the Social Web Foundation and PhD candidate at the current school. Mallory, please join us on stage. There you are. Thank you. Sheila, I turn it to you. Turn this mic on. Okay, go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. Oh, I'm scared now. Good morning, everybody. I'm really delighted to be here this morning with this distinguished panel of experts to talk about a topic that I don't know. Okay, but, oh, okay, fine. It's going to be a very thought-provoking discussion on, of course, AI and emerging markets. If you're as old as I am, then you know how hard it is to keep up with the pace of technology advancing at a mind-boggling and unprecedented speed. And at the heart of this revolution is artificial intelligence in all the layers of what that means. It isn't just a tool, it is a force for reshaping industries, economies, nations, societies on a global level. And the drive for AI to sustain development is huge. It offers the promise of revolutionizing traditional labor markets, creating new opportunities. Sorry, okay. Okay. I'll do it only because you told me to. Nobody else can tell me to do that. And of course, addressing some of the most pressing challenges faced by developing nations. But, of course, as a human rights lawyer, I know that great power comes with great responsibility, so we have to tackle the questions, ethical questions, privacy, security, equity, and we want to make sure that as we embrace artificial intelligence and everything that it has to offer, we don't hurt people along the way. So today, our distinguished panel of experts are at the forefront of this revolution. They're going to bring diverse perspectives from government, industry, academia, civil society, and I'm eager to hear their thoughts on how AI can be harnessed for the greater good. Let's dive into the conversation. I will start with you, Minister Terr-Petrosyan. As High-Tech Minister of Armenia, this issue falls squarely in your lap. As Armenia works towards best harnessing the potential of AI, how do you envision these advancements helping to position Armenia as a stronger player on a global stage, and particularly in terms of leveling the playing field politically, economically, with our neighboring countries? How can AI contribute to reducing the current imbalances in political, financial, and perhaps even military strength in the region.
See, that's why that has to be turned off. Like, I knew it.
Let's try.
Is there something that... Maybe just unplug it.
No, it is true with all mics. With all mics.
Always unplug it. Yeah, now do it.
One, no. One, no.
Nice work, nice work.
Distinguished panelists, it's a privilege to be here today and to be involved in such a vital conversation about artificial intelligence and its impact on our lives. When talking about AI, it's important to say, to remember the famous metaphor, which is that the medal has two sides. So the first side is all about the opportunities that AI is going to offer us, which is going to be related to all the areas within the structure of economy: health, education, agriculture, or wherever you wish, mining stuff, energy, everywhere. So it's going to offer us new solutions that is going to make our lives easier. That's obvious, of course. So here, the government of Armenia, we are putting and uniting our efforts to use the maximum potential of AI. But this is the first side of a medal, because you were asking how to somehow balance the powers in the region, which was not only about the political and economic side, it was also about the military stuff in your question. So here we are facing the second side of the medal. So here we have some fears, and it's important to speak about the issue of weaponizing AI, which is quite popular nowadays in many countries, in many platforms, such discussions, that we must be very careful when speaking about weaponizing AI. Of course, it's very attractive from one hand, but from the other side, there are many risks and challenges that AI technologies are going to bring with them for the humanity here. So this is why, starting from the last part of your question, I can say that Armenia is very much involved in many agendas and topics related to the application of the regulation of AI. So we are engaged in many topics regarding this regulation stuff of AI, because we have the feeling of responsibility, not only towards us. We today there, and especially it's important to speak about not allowing the monopoly of AI in one group's hand. We can realize which risks it will have it will bring and create for us, which challenges. So this is why we are involved in such platforms concerning this regulation part. And this means that the legislative work we are going to do, we are going to initiate in cooperation with international partners. So it's an important stuff that the government is focused on nowadays. But from the other hand, as I already mentioned, it's all about the opportunities especially for the economic development for our country, which is going to support the political leadership to implement its projects, programs. So here that we are putting our more and more efforts to use the maximum potential of artificial intelligence. For reaching our goals, there are three main directions that Armenian government is following. The human capital, the human talents, where we are putting a lot of investments, because it's all about the new job specializations, new specifications. Here we are going to put more investments. It's about the infrastructure and data. Speaking about in the part of infrastructure, I can bring some example. For example, inside the Yerevan State University, we are opening AI, the first AI supercomputing center. We are starting with 72 GPUs, and we are dreaming of having more and more in the future. We are in active discussions with our international partners, with many huge corporations. We have already opened another supercomputing center at the engineering city, where the supercomputing center is supporting the machine learning, cloud computing, research in artificial intelligence, in data analysis, in astrophysics, in quantum physics, in bioinformatics. So again, those are examples that Armenian government is putting a lot of resources and investments. And speaking about that, here again we have some progress. We just finalized the draft law on public information, which is going to improve open data management and access. So trying to sum up, again, this all about the possibilities and new opportunities which Armenia is going to use as much as it is possible, for taking into account our opportunities and limited resources, of course. But the second is all about the challenges, because speaking about labor market challenges, yes, it's challenging. The fear of job displacement is quite real. And it's quite real, even if for the IT sector, which is quite advanced in Armenia, it's real for basic coding, for monitoring, for system maintenance. There are many risks for this kind of IT specialists. We do realize it, but here we are suggesting to use the helicopter view to maybe to go deeper in the context to get the answers to these questions. And to us it's simple. It's not only just a simple let's say elimination of job. It's coming to redefine them. It's definitely is going to reshape all the economy and the structure and the logic of economy. But it's also, we are following them, and it's a reality, and the government of Armenia and the many corporations in the high-tech industry, they are reskilling, upskilling workforce in Armenia to ensuring ourselves that our people, our society is ready for the new, for the future technologies, and it's very important to ensure ourselves that the society of Armenia is not going just to become a participant in these processes, but the leaders of the new technologies, AI future. So, but the second thing, just finalizing and trying to sum up, is that Armenia, logically, we are very much, it's about careful consideration and deliberation. Because when we speak about defense industry, military industry, as I already mentioned, there are a lot of risks that we are taking into consideration. We have to take into consideration. So here we are kind of, let's say, conservative. Of course, discussing the possibilities of bringing new technologies into military industry, but we have some fears. There are some risks and challenges which are obvious, and we are thinking twice or 10 times more before making important decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Hayratpetyan. That was really encouraging, and I'm so excited to see your capable hands take this forward for Armenia and our people. I'll move over to Rohit. You work at Reliance Industries, which is one of India's largest conglomerates, with diversified interests in energy, petrochemicals, telecommunications, and retail. Given Reliance's significant role in driving India's economic growth and technological innovation, how do you see the advancements in AI contributing to India's strategic positioning on the global stage, and in what ways can AI help India bridge any gaps in political and economic influence with other major powers? And what role do you see for AI in enhancing India's overall competitiveness and strength in the international area? And the answer can't just be that India is already the strongest.
For that, I need the minister's help. Okay, I'll get yours. Good morning. It started again? Yeah, it is. Good. So, good morning, and Excellency, co-panelists, chairperson. Just a quick show of hands. How many of you use ChatGPT just to get a sense of the terms? You can own up. You can be honest. Okay. Okay. So, I was with the key functionary of Indian IT from the government side, and what he said was startling. He said, this is all entertainment. Actually, the real things in AI have yet to start. So the good news is that perhaps all of us, those whose hands went up and those whose hands didn't go up as yet, are actually at the starting point. In a civilizational sense, certainly, if not in a tactical sense. Some of us may be 6 months ahead, a year ahead. I'm not talking of the high-end CS jocks, but generally it's a point of start. Now, on your question, Chairperson, I think the critical issue in my company is the appreciation that what's good for India is good for Reliance. So you simply align yourself to national goals, and the rest starts unraveling. So one of the things we do is an AI native digital infrastructure. We have about 480 million SIM cards in the phones of people, and that includes a lot of data being used at maybe an average of 30 GB per month on a base of 480 million. So you can do the math, those of you inclined to sort of turn to your ChatGPT on this one. And the total R&D spend in the last 3 years is about $1.5 billion. And some of it, as you might suspect, is in the arena of high technology. 2005 555 patents, and out of them 350 in the arena I mentioned. The rest are in the other areas which are also being closely intertwined. Why I say this should be obvious enough slowly, but bioenergy, solar, green, high-value chemicals, they all integrate into the beyond ChatGPT fun and games argument that I'm trying to make. Our patents in 6G, 5G, AI, LLMs, and AI deep learning hopefully will start talking to each other, and for the benefit of not just Reliance, but India and the larger part that I will allude to in a few moments around the India AI mission and the GPAI, which is, of course, as some of you might know, a global partnership on AI in which India was the chair. A turnover of 120 billion is what we represent, and EBITDA of 21 billion, and about net profit of about 9.5. What does it lead to? It leads to a merchandise export of 8% of total India's merchandise exports. And last statistic to pay for my supper, which is 8% of India's merchandise, $22 billion worth of taxes in a year. So that's a bit of this. Now, what it leads to is a business called Jio, Reliance Jio, which has, on a standalone basis, it is the 12th largest company in India already on telecoms and digital alone. And we see ourselves as a digital company, not just a mere telecom company. And it's about 12 billion on its own feet. Now, what's the potential, therefore, to connect, say, 1.5 million schools to high-speed internet, Excellency, 70,000 hospitals, a million and slightly more, 1.2 million doctors? This all leads up to the non-fun and games part, which is fundamentally around the pillars of health, which is diagnosis, prediction, entertainment, personalization at that, retail, the optimization of the supply chains, agriculture on weather predictions, crop, soil health, and so on and so forth, education, which is personalization, etc. So the idea, therefore, in Reliance, as Chairman Mukesh Ambani said about less than 15 days back at the annual general meeting, is that a Jio cloud, a cloud which has 100 GB of space for each of the 480 million consumers, will be perhaps the foundational principle around which computational ability and service to the cause of each person. And these are not just rich people, these are ordinary people all over the place who will very shortly around Diwali have this sort of computation power and cloud power. So, which brings me to the India story, where the India part is around an India AI mission. And the India AI mission is pretty much inclusive. The name is India, but I think everyone's invited. We have recently hosted the GPAI, as I mentioned. And for those of you who don't know about Indian AI mission, it is under the Ministry of Electronics and IT of India. And we are looking at a computation capability of 10,000 GPUs. And in the case of Reliance, our data centers and processing capacity will be fueled entirely by green energy, because we also have the energy complex just next door in Jamnagar in Gujarat. So back to India, the larger part, which was good for them, for the country is good for us. So the computation capacity, ladies and gentlemen, the innovation center, which includes indigenous LLMs, and we can talk a little bit more if Sheila so chooses, around indigenous LLMs, which are pretty important to stay away from what is already capturing the global attention of friends across the Atlantic. Domain-specific foundation models. We are also looking at data platforms in the India AI mission and future skilling, because I think personally, AI for $1 billion is a very worthwhile cause to have. Because otherwise the gap will only accentuate between the haves and the have-nots and will create tremendous problems. Minister alluded to jobs going awry. There is research in, among others, MIT, which is arguing that the lower down jobs will stay. The upper guys will also come in with their context and their erudition. It's the middle-level jobs which might be in serious danger. So how do you, therefore, pull up people right at the bottom of the pyramid with computational power, with the data and ubiquity at that? Indian data is 10% of the rates at which the West gets their data. So how do you pull up the entire bottom layer up and then equip them with skills which potentially are a big mission by themselves? And last but not the least, the startup financing, safe and trustable AI and app development. So these are the 7 pillars. I encourage you to just type the agenda of the India AI mission to just get a sense of where the country is. And there is through the GPAI, India has tried to involve the 41 odd partner countries that are already there, and the party has just begun. So cross-sectoral applications of real-time usage in, say, for example, a farmer, how can he use the tools which are embedded with the relevant technology which can potentially make them much more productive is the game, and not necessarily just little queries which Google has been giving us all this while. And as a struggling researcher, Sheila, I must mention here that AI can hallucinate significantly. It can generate citations which don't exist. So it's very, very important to realize that hallucinations and fake can also go up significantly with AI. And yesterday in a session, it was brilliantly put to what Minister also just said, that the bad AI is much more accessible now because people don't have to pay for most of it. Earlier there was a hardware cost. Today there is none, or virtually none. So we have to guard and protect it together. Collaborate at the enterprise level is what I can do. Minister, of course, at a policy end can tell us more. But suffice to say that democratizing it and standing in close contact with each other is the way forward for AI. And I'll end where I began, which is that all of us can actually be thinking of us at the starting line. We are still at the starting line. And I think it's important to recognize that none of us is an expert. We are all learning, and we can learn from each other. So for a start, maybe go on LinkedIn, talk to each other, read a lot more than you actually do, and you'll find that 20 years down the line, those who have started today, the point of start of today will be very important. So that's where Yerevan Dialogue fits in. That's a beautiful setting, and thank you for hosting us here. And this was the beginning of your AI journey for those of you whose hands were still down. Thank you.
I was trying to remember the most recent AI hallucination that I came across but I couldn't remember it. I just remember laughing out loud and thinking, we really need to be careful when we rely too much on ChatGPT. Thank you, Rohit. That was really, really insightful and helpful. And the numbers that you deal with, the scales that you deal with in India, and it just like, I can't wrap my head around them. So, Anush, we move on to you. PixArt, our unicorn, right? Armenia's one of many, or one of the only one, yeah, the first one, has become a global leader in the creative tech space and leveraging AI to empower millions of users worldwide. Given your experience at the intersection of artificial intelligence and creativity, how do you see artificial intelligence transforming not just industries, but also just how the way individuals express themselves and engage with digital content? What unique challenges and opportunities do you encounter when integrating AI into a platform that serves such a diverse and creative global community?
I guess we are okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for the question. And just to introduce PixArt, PixArt is one of the biggest digital creation platforms with more than 1 billion of downloads, 150 million active users in 150 countries worldwide. So PixArt started just like a drawing tool, and then it grew to like a very diverse and versatile platform when you can create anything. So you can refine your selfies, you can create a social post and share it in Instagram, TikTok, wherever you want. You can also create assets for your digital, like small businesses, like anything, to share on, for example, Shopify, Etsy, and PixArt will help you with this. What I already like to give you an example, yeah. If you are a small business owner, be it a small coffee shop or you are making pastries, you can take a photo of your product that you want to upsell. Then, in a few clicks, really in a very intuitive way, spending really like not much time, you are taking a photo with no special setup or lighting or anything. And then you are removing your background, you are enhancing the photo you have created, colors, lighting, quality of the photo. Then you can use either one of the million templates that we are offering on the platform, or the best way, using AI to create a background for your photo, for your digital asset. Just to give you an idea of what is happening at the PixArt, we have monthly more than 2 million assets creating only using our text-to-image tool. So when you enter a prompt and you are generating an image based on your wishes, understanding. So all the AI tools that I can mention that exist now in PixArt, text-to-image, text-to-video, image-to-video, background removal, background creation, and many more. They allow you to enhance your creativity. So no more, you do not need a professional to create an asset for you. You just in several clicks can do that. Also, it gives you an opportunity to make a process, like if you have several products, not to spend time on each of them, but make a batch processing and post it wherever you want. So the main thing that AI, like PixArt was already on that way, but what AI tools brought to the platform, this is making AI accessible, making creation process accessible and intuitive for everyone. So you can unleash your creativity, you can use the tools, you can try whatever you want without really spending a lot of hours of learning how these tools work on making a professional edit or something else. So this is mainly how we're using the platform. Coming to your next question, so what challenges we see there? Like, I will name a few. First of all, diverse cultural contexts and sensibilities. So AI models are not yet ready to understand what is this fine distinction between the cultures, between the prompt you are entering and results you are waiting. So this is the first one. The second one is, of course, safety and security. So we are not yet reached, but like you can use AI tools to generate something really, really very beautiful and something really ugly that can be misused in whatever ways possible. And the next thing is bias. So you're training AI models and they can be biased towards the data. So actually all these challenges that I named are highly the outcome of the data, because whatever data we use for training the models, the outcome will depend on the data diversity and the data accessibility that we had for these models. The quality, the diversity, the understanding of what actually the prompt alignment, what actually user wants from us, this all heavily rely on data. PixArt is now partnering with Getty Images to create a clean model when we will not have such an issue, but for you to understand, like the quality of the models is highly dependent on the amount of data. And if you take like a clean model based on some limited, even if these are millions, data compared to the models trained on the much vaster amounts of data that are available in the internet, so the quality still suffers, but we are working on this direction. And mainly this is it. If you have any other questions.
So basically you're saying the more people use it, the better the data.
The more people use it, the more feedback we get, the more data we are generating that then come back, can fill back the training data and empower the next, iteration of the model training. We will have better models. Yeah. And maybe one thing that I forgot to mention is intellectual property and copyright. So we need to understand these are like two questions. First of all, we've created this digital art. Users somebody spent time to create a prompt, to adjust it, and to refine the output. Who owns the right for this digital art? Because actually, this is a question that is still open, and we do not have an answer to it. And the second one, as I said, we have clean models, and we have models that is trained on anything accessible. So how we, there are a lot of artists' work used in the training of these models. How we give the attribution, how we pay these artists, how we make sure that this is a right way of use of their data. This is another question that we need to answer.
Answer it, but I'm a human rights lawyer, not an IT lawyer. But it's true. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Anush. That's, Hoda, we move on to you. Is this working? No. Why? Oh, no. Okay. As a leader in both emerging tech and research innovation, you are deeply involved. Stopped again? No. Did it? No. Okay. In the intersection of technology and ethics, as AI continues to advance and integrate into various sectors, what do you see as the most pressing ethical concerns that need to be addressed? How can emerging markets, in particular, ensure that AI is developed and deployed in ways that uphold privacy, security, and fairness, while also avoiding the pitfalls of bias and inequality?
You can hear me. I hope eventually you will. I think the major aspects here when we are considering ethics with anything, not just AI, with emerging technology cluster in general, we have to admit, I don't know how many technologists are out there in the room, but we have to admit that we're not doing our right due diligence, because the level of governance that exists out there when it comes to producing genuine stack of algorithms that are also ethically mindful is very weak. I think we tend to introduce technology that is functional, but not necessarily human or ethical. And within the lab in EmirateSec, we are trying to make sure that we bring inceptions and innovation that is quite different. So we try to, yes, build the hardware, build the software, build the algorithmic cluster, but we also care about the policy work, the regulation work that goes around it. Because let's face it, in today's world, if you have an amazing piece of technology that would change the world, if you didn't have access to market with proper regulation and proper policy, then it's a moot point. I mean, your example, Anush, is one of the striking example. Like when it comes to today's definition of intellectual property, we are still stuck in outdated notions, right? We cannot attribute the whole stack of ownership that exists within the digital space, because the lawyers and the legal system is still defining intellectual property in specific sense. To the fact that in the United States, for example, we do have certain laws and legislations that would say that AI doesn't have access to intellectual property kind of rights. And fast forward to today, when we have AlphaFold, for example, by Google, that defines the new structure of protein and structure them. Who would own those kind of a new intellectual property? Because in a human kind of world, when a scientist get to that innovation, they have acquisition of ownership, but we don't. So to me, this is like a striking part of the ethical consideration when you do a mapping, and this is one of the statistics that I constantly share to people, because I think we live in a world that people think, we don't have enough regulations on policies related to AI. In reality, if you looked at the OECD Observatory AI dashboard that they created, you have 1,000 AI regulations and policies, or over 1,000 AI regulations and policies that exist globally. Only, of course, the policy shows an interest in regulation. I think only around 25% matures to regulation level. And from those 25%, you would have in between 20% to 15% that would focus on ethical considerations. So it's such a slim kind of percentage of the overall efforts, the global efforts that we are having. But the good news that the mass of the emerging markets, the mass of technology developers who come from emerging markets keep on saying what we have heard the minister say: we don't want to be adopters of technology, we want to be creators of this technology, and we want to make sure that we're not lost in the bias, that our nonsense culture, details that exist within every kind of consortium of societies do translate into the algorithm. So this dictates a new paradigm of power when it comes to building the technology. It means that we have to start building technological solutions within this microeconomic climates, because then you would contribute to building new ventures as well. I'm so happy about AI India kind of initiative, because we collaborated with AI India on building different regulatory structures and building algorithmic fairness within the AI. Algorithmic fairness is not new. Like in 2017 and 2016, IBM and Google started initiatives around 360, I think it was called IBM 360, when they were trying to debias the algorithm. You have debuggers today. I don't know how many programmers in the room. When you program a code, you tend to debug it to remove all kind of logical and illogical sometimes bugs from the code. But you don't have something that would remove the biases. So IBM have started that kind of movement by saying we want to remove the bias, but then it's not kind of a real-time analysis to this. So we need to have much more rigorous effort today. Just in 2023, we started, like I have a researcher in my lab who's quite happy that he has to write algorithms that are explainable, that are providing consent to users, and at the same time they have a high level of accountability. Imagine you would know, you just refer to the hallucination of the AI, right? So I think over 70% of our AI LLMs are hallucinating. And let's not just also abstract the AI universe within LLMs, but over 70% of our existing LLMs are hallucinating. And actually scientists in the field are referring to these hallucinations as creative pursuits. So they're saying it's amazing that the AI is hallucinating actually, because it's gonna produce a new maybe artwork or a new kind of intellectual property aspects. To us in the field of security, it's like a nightmare, because you are introducing a technology to market that is unreliable. Imagine using that within cancer research, which is one of the research that we have done in our lab as well. We have tried to, I think, tweak the samples on cancer analysis that's use AI, and most of the 70%, our tweaks went undetected, and the algorithm that's being used in few of the technologies that are currently industrially in mass use. Can you imagine how many people are being misdiagnosed on a wider scale of things? So I think we really need to bring in ethics to the map. I think the EU has started with the GDPR law saying that algorithms actually should not be developed in mass surveillance structure. They're saying you have the right not to be analyzed as a user. You have the right to be forgotten from the platform. You have the right as well on multiple aspects. But we don't translate that to technology. So, I mean, lawyers and regulators could write whatever they want on these bills, but if technology is not translating that, it's a moot point. So, in the arena of ethics, I think we do have over 15 requirements that are well celebrated today. Amidst them is intellectual properties rights and consent and explainability, accountability and fairness, amidst other things. But the striking difference here that we see is that emerging markets are going to be the markets that I think would put these ethical translations into technology into the map, because they care that their languages, their culture, their ethical nonsense are not forgotten into the wider mix and not assimilated by the mass data sets that are being, synthesized by the AI structures.
Hello. Okay. Yes, I did share the questions with the panelists before, but I think I want to ask it for the audience. Thank you, Hoda. That was really, really insightful, and I just kept, as you were talking, I kept remembering one of the first things I learned in law school, which was that law is always catching up and always out of breath. So, especially with tech, it's going to be ever more so, but we got to work together with the developers and the lawyers to make sure that we're in good shape. Mallory, on to you. How do you suggest that we separate the durable, transformative aspects of AI from the hype? What criteria or indicators should we use to discern which AI advancements are truly impactful and which ones are more just fleeting trends?
I think, oh wow, it's really loud, but it works. Yeah, no, thanks very much for inviting me to this panel. It's always a real pleasure to be part of these events, and thanks to the hosts in Armenia as well. So I am also a technologist and don't want to be the last person to go in this really, I think, uplifting and hopeful panel to shatter everyone's hopes about the promises of AI, but I do, and I also will admit that I love robots. I love interacting with new technology, so I'm very pro AI, but this I think is why it's so important to address the hype, actually. I think that without hyping the capabilities of the current tools or the future tools, we have a lot to be impressed by, and there's a lot of real and tangible potential. So let me get into some of that. So I guess we haven't really been living very long with the imagination of generative AI. It's been less than 2 years that we had ChatGPT, for example, on the market. And also generative images are also really rather new. I remember actually pretty vividly, I wrote a tweet when I first started using ChatGPT. I'm like, this is just 3 Wikipedias in a trench coat. Like, how could this be more impressive than like the largest collaborative knowledge project in the history of the world? That was sort of my take. I stand by that tweet, actually. But I think in other ways, though, AI is very old. I think the first academic project focused on artificial intelligence is from the 1950s. And recently, probably before I played with ChatGPT, read this fascinating book on the history of the filing cabinet that gave me all kinds of understanding of how just data structures in general have planted this creative seed in humanity around how, if we learn and structure data, how we can extrapolate it and use it. And I mean, if we're talking about how emerging markets or governments can leverage AI, we are kind of talking about advanced filing cabinets, really, right? We're talking about, bureaucracy enhanced. This is not to say that this isn't great. Like I said, I think there's a lot to like here. I wanted to talk about a few of the guardrails or a few of the constraints maybe that will come into play as we think about what the future is, right? So if, by some measures, I think, what we see now in terms of the impressive capabilities of generative AI, I think we may not see a lot of massive, impressive gains for a while. I know that's counter maybe to some people who've spoken before, but I think the reasons are very clear. One, I would just say that computing power, it does require a lot of computation that has a real impact on the environment. So whatever major advances are made, we do need to think about how that has an impact on energy consumption, on data centers globally, and that sort of thing. So that may be one constraint that we probably should impose. Another is data sources. So as has been kind of alluded to before, the way that these large models are able to work so well is when there's a lot of data. So the ones that are really impressive, like generative AI, they're really only very impressive in English, right? If people have noticed that, it's because there's a lot of English language content out in the world. It's less impressive in other languages where there's not the same volume of content in those languages. There are other examples of this. Content moderation on social media, it's really spotty. And some of the ways in which it's really challenged is in types of content where it's not very abundant. So one example, which actually an executive from Facebook at the time admitted, was there was an active shooter video that came out of New Zealand. And so they started talking about how can we build AI detection to stop those kinds of videos from going viral. And the Facebook executive admitted that, well, I mean, we don't really have a whole lot of videos of active shooting incidents to train a model on. And so that kind of imposes this natural limitation on how good a detection model could ever be. There's a lot of examples like that. They're just, and also we just don't really have big piles of data lying around anymore that haven't already been scooped up by these tools. And to the point around copyright, now that these big language models have been released, and also video and photos, content owners and publishers are now a lot smarter about their ownership of that data. And so new models that will be trained on existing data will have less data than before, if that makes sense. So, the New York Times, Wikipedia, these large sources of data are now not going to allow that to just be scooped up for free. But let me talk more about how it is going to get incrementally better. It will improve, no doubt. I have really high hopes for what Hoda was speaking about in terms of the eradication of bias and so on. Again, there are going to be natural limits. There's always going to be hallucination. There's always going to be mistakes. And therefore, I think the antidote to those risks is just to be careful about how it's applied and to then regulate or worry about the guardrails around the application of the tool and not imagine that it could always be perfect. Another way that it's getting incrementally better is that query length can become massive. You can feed these generative tools an entire book or 2 or 3 and then ask it to generate something from that. That's a massive query. That's millions of characters. So it will get better. New applications are going to get better, but again, this is aligned with where are the sources of data coming from, and then what can you build from it. I also just want to say that I think, again, there's the reason I don't want to be in the position of sort of the anti-hyper here is that I do think that the things that have hit the headlines that have made everyone a little worried actually about AI are, it's generally because they've been democratized, right? So some of the AI doomerism, right, the opposite of hyping, is because these tools are in all of our hands. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I don't think we should be inherently scared of them just because a lot of people are using them. I think that's actually pretty exciting. And so hopefully the regulation around that, as others have mentioned, keeps that in mind and keeps it democratic. I want to just run through a couple things that I can give you a message about, not just like a learning tutorial about machine learning. But what I worry about the hype is that it obscures some real political economic questions. For example, having always worked in software, and one of the ways I think about AI is just, it is data-driven software. It is just software, but like today's software. One of the things that has been going on for a long time since the digitalization in governments and other sectors is that digitalization, software, and now AI are seen as austerity measures, that now we can save money because the tool will do it for us. And I just don't think that that's the right way to think about these tools. In fact, what it maybe allows is actually that you invest more, but you're not investing more in the tool, you're investing more in the people that are running governments, the people that are running businesses, and you see the AI tools as supplementary to that. So you're continuing to strengthen your social sector, you're continuing to strengthen these important functions and roles, as well as getting the boon from the AI tech capabilities and enhancing what your workers are doing and what your civil servants are doing and so on. And so rather than thinking of AI as a replacement, AI is a supplement to human intelligence. And the real goal and the real project is to enhance and improve human intelligence. I have a lot more notes here, but I get the sense that other people want to come in with other questions.
Thank you, Mallory. I always also... Can you turn off your microphone so I don't freak out? Thanks. Yeah, I also, in the conversations about whether AI is beneficial or going to take jobs and what's the hype, and I just say I think it is a supplement to human intelligence, and it does help us level up. And I think all forms of technology, or most at least, have helped us increase our capacity for like our potential, our human potential. Okay, hold on. I'm going to be the moderator that's going to cut us off at 11. That means 5 minutes. I think I'm going to go with one question to one, oh no. We can also all ask questions afterwards, but I will allow a question right here.
Sujan Chinoy, the Director General of the Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, New Delhi. Question is to Mallory. You spoke about the lack of data for example, machine learning for shooters. Now, is it possible that in the age of artificial intelligence, you can also have artificial simulated data? Why do you actually need to wait for clips, horrendous clips like that to come along before you wait to teach machine learning? Why can't you create simulated data that works quite as effectively? Second part of the question is about whether AI will be agnostic in terms of the sensitivities of different civilizations, their histories, their religion, their mores, their traditions. If not, and it becomes a generalized tool available to everyone, and innocently using such tools, will it lead to a certain kind of cognitive warfare that puts some people at advantage and vast numbers, mostly in developing countries, at a great disadvantage? Thank you.
Yeah, happy to answer. And also, I think, Hoda, you might have a response as well. So to your question about simulated data, this is a very good idea, and I think one that others have had. The problem with using simulated data to train the models that then are either generative or analytical is that it erodes the accuracy over time, and you get diminishing returns really quickly. So there have been some people who said this is another constraint even of the existing large language models that power something like ChatGPT, it may actually start getting worse unless you optimize in other ways, because the data that's out there now, because there's so much data being generated by AI, it's starting to feed back into itself, and it will start declining. So you need ways to signal to the model, don't scoop this up, it's already synthetic, versus keep scooping this up, it's new and novel, and it's going to improve the model. So I think we have to be really careful with these ideas, and this is, again, why the constraint exists. And it feeds exactly into your second question, which is then clearly there are going to be differences and disparities because of the availability of data in different parts of the world, in different languages, in different cultures. It's going to create differences in capabilities of AI. I will just explain, I'll just share one quick example. I was listening to someone describe how they were running into issues, not just with other languages, but other images or words for things. So they were saying, you know, in one culture, the shape of a cup is different than it is in another. And so when you do a sort of image capture and the computer vision is trying to detect, is this a cup? It first has to see that it's a cup, but it's differently shaped in another culture. And it also then translates that word as cup, which is an English word. And it's probably not called cup in that language either. So we keep translating everything through English and then back out again, which is really inefficient and also continues to feed and prioritize this sort of English-centric view and vision of the world. And I think without, you know, we are talking about emerging markets, right? And I think I agree with the panelists who've said there is a lot of promise in emerging markets because there's so much that can be done here that will actually improve AI for everyone if it's done in a different way.
Just to add to what you have said, Mallory, I think in the lab we have different learning models for different purposes. So it depends actually on the purpose. And we don't want to assimilate a generic purpose. I think the standard machine learning algorithm is using a learning set, a fixed learning set, to generate some kind of learnings based on that. But we do have as well advanced deep learning adaptive model that you use mostly in robotic structures. For example, imagine a robot that goes into a forest not knowing the dimensions of the robot of the forest, and then they recalculate their dimensions based on the live feed of the data. Within these scenarios, like if you pre-generated data and did the assimilation, you might fail because the adaptability of the model will be really degraded. So it depends on the context, I would say, on when you simulate the data. It's not the best scenario because you tend to poison the learning model of the algorithm. And you want always your algorithm to be as realistic as possible. So again, depends on the algorithm that's being developed. Yeah.
We have ended right on time. Any further questions can be addressed to our co-panelists during the break that's coming up. Thank you all so much. You made my job so easy. I learned so much. And I think this was a wonderful panel for the first thing in the morning. Thank you all.
And thereafter, I'll ask a couple of questions, and the last 20 minutes will be dedicated to asking the audience to ask any questions or any clarifications that you may see. My name is Kwame Owino. I work at the Institute of Economic Affairs, which is a think tank based. I'm Kwame Owino. I work at the Institute of Economic Affairs, which is a think tank based in Kenya. And I'm glad to be here to moderate this interesting discussion about a new Phoenix. So two things are certain. One of those is change, and the dynamism of that change, the pace of that change is less evident. But I think discussions such as this in the last couple of years make it clear, or rather speak as if it's self-evident that certain things in the geopolitical world order is changing. The direction and the pace are not necessarily known, though of course we hear assertions that they're clear. Out of that also comes an assertiveness of what we call the global south, whatever that configuration means. It confuses me as well at times. But regardless of that, I think global changes are happening. It's happening in ways that will affect how international institutions are built and how they make decisions, how those decisions are even enforced. But in addition to that, who is making those decisions? Some of these are clearly driven by economic and political changes. I think the footnote that, the notes that we were given as part of this talks about the fact that in the next 20 years or so, perhaps less, the four largest economies of the world, four will be those that are known as three-quarters of the four largest economies in the world will come from what is today called the global south. I think you know which countries those will necessarily be. And with that kind of change in the configuration, but just the kind of change in how productivity and economic welfare, certainly that will affect the political world. I think as I come to the end, two things. As a student of economics, we take it for granted that exchange matters, and when people exchange things, regardless of who it is with, that in itself is enough. I think reality slaps us in the face again and again by saying, look, people care as well for what kind of, who they're exchanging with, in whose borders, and what the regard of one person or one group of people has for the other. So part of this question is not just economics and driven by economic factors, it's also driven by a very strong sense of identity, and that's not to be debated. But I'll suspend my comments for this. I'd expect us to take three things from this, or at least those are my three questions. One, is that change, I think we accept that that change is happening, at what pace, and what are some of the factors that are driving it. And the second one is change and progress. Change is a given, progress not. Is a kind of change we are going to see generating some progress, and if not, I think how do we push whatever levers, institutional, political, to ensure that it goes in the right way? Because I think change as an end in itself is not necessarily one good thing. And I think I've had voices on the African continent saying, look, change for its sake is not something to be celebrated. So we'll have our panelists here, and I'll have the first panelist, which is, I come from the African continent, we tend to be very tonal, so if I mispronounce your name, please forgive that. Natsakan Safarian, who's the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs in the Republic of Armenia. So you have 8 minutes, please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Kwame. Very good morning to everyone. That you pronounced it correctly, so thank you for that as well. Let me first start by...
Can you hear me in the back? Yeah. So maybe you should use this.
Let me first start by reflecting on some of the discussions from previous sessions yesterday. Our former Minister of Foreign Affairs said in his panel that polls matter or polls are central, while the former President of Lithuania said that small nations should be irritants to the big ones. And I also noted Samir Saran's question as to who leads the global south, and his answer was no one. So this made me think that the world system is more of a constellation rather than a multipolar system. It's a constellation with its own gravitation force, that keeps the system in balance, and even when a small state is out of orbit, the whole system is insured. In today's globalized world, unrest in one place echoes developments in others, and economic crisis, conflicts, disruption of supply chains, climate change leave a negative effect on all parties involved, but consequences of such challenges are felt worse in Global South. The Global South often faces common challenges, and those challenges drive efforts for economic development and cooperation. At the same time, those challenges differ from country to country, from region to region. While some of countries in Global South, for some of those countries, remoteness, dependence on ocean resources, lack of water resources, vulnerability to climate change impacts are main obstacles for sustainable development. Others suffer from geographical location and consequences rising from that. As a landlocked country, Armenia has been blocked from the east and west for a very long time, and it has faced challenges that not only hindered our path to meet the achieving the sustainable development goals, but also posed a threat to the country's national security and stability in the region and in broader sense. And we have spoken about the crossroad of peace during the previous panels. It was presented by our Prime Minister, Nicole Pashinyan. And this is actually and essentially a project, an initiative that connects Global South to Global North. And in this regard, I have to mention that the role of India and its efforts are noteworthy. The Voice of Global South Summit provides an effective platform for developing nations to speak out, to manifest their concerns and challenges, voice their priorities and share their achievements. Armenia is diversifying its foreign policy, economic policy, security relations, and we are diversifying it to different directions, and including and very prominently to the Global South. I would also like to mention that this dialogue, the Yerevan dialogue, is actually an initiative and an event that was essentially share of good practices from our Indian colleagues, Indian partners, and this is an example of effective cooperation among Global South and sharing their experience. One more such initiative is Armenia joining International Solar Alliance. That was actually proposed to us by our Indian colleagues. And to answer your question, there are positive developments in this regard, and we have to work jointly to make joint efforts to ensure that most of these initiatives, most of these practices are positive.
All right, so we go now to VJ Chalpaiwale, who's in charge of the Department of Foreign Affairs for the BJP.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you to the organizers of this great event, both to Foreign Ministry of Armenia as well as the Observer Research Foundation. This is a great initiative. Friends, let us accept the fact that most of the global institutes, those who are controlling both narratives and policies in today's world, are the product of World War II. And therefore, the allies have created these institutions built for their own interest. And large population, many countries have been denied to have those kind of privileges in that system. During that period, India and many other countries have created a platform called non-aligned movement, which essentially was a passive platform of not their, it actually reflects their inability to take sides on the global issues. Now, the countries like India and many other in those parts of the world, those who have been denied their due rights on the global issues, are trying to come together and fight the challenges and also harness the opportunities that have coming in terms of advantages due to their demographic advantages, large resources of the minerals and the critical materials, and also technology. Maybe it is health. Yesterday we talked about digital public infrastructure and many other. So I think Global South is now at a very unique position to at least drive the narratives and create the policies which will protect their self-interest and also give solutions to various problems which are facing in today's world. And I will give you the classic example of COVID vaccines, that if India would not have been there, half of the population of world would have been remained without vaccination, because the vaccines provided by the Western countries were simply unaffordable, and neither they had production capabilities for such a large volumes. So there is a possibility of win-win situation if the countries of Global South come together. I'm sure you know that till India presided G20 in last year, entire African continent was not represented in G20. So now with the G20, in fact it is now G21, this major anomaly has been rectified due to the leadership of India. And there can be many examples like this. Even for the issues like climate change, today whatever deterioration we are seeing is mainly because of overexploitation of natural resources by the West. Now we have to find out the common solutions which will give us affordable and equitable solutions to this great danger. I am not denying that there is a great danger to the climate, but availability of the technology and availability of the resources to implement those technologies is also equally important, and Global South is ready to play a major role in this. I think in this context, Global South actually represents both great opportunities and also challenges. The challenges like terrorism, extremism, climate change, availability or non-availability of the technologies, and most importantly, the democracy. And in many parts of the world, including some countries in Global South, are facing threat to democracy, and that also is worrisome. But at the same time, the opportunities are enormous, and as Samir Saran yesterday said, that there is no leader, and that is the strength of Global South, because with the collective responsibility and collective leadership, I am sure the Global South will be able to create not only new narrative, but also provide unique solutions that will cater the needs of the large population of the world. And thank you very much.
All right. Our third panelist is Mr. Igosa Sagai, who is the Director General of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs. And as you go through your comments, I mean, I think a point has just occurred to me, and I think you are the person to perhaps discuss it as well, in addition to your comments. One of those is that African representation in the G20, or G21 as everybody says, has been hyped, celebrated, for good reasons. But it seems to some people who are sensible but cynical that, quote unquote, Africa doesn't know what to do with it. Is that true?
I didn't get that.
Okay, so I think everybody celebrated when Africa's admission, if I may say, as a member of the G20, right? But it's been celebrated. I think everybody's lauded that, and I think India gets a pat on the back from many African countries, leaders, for doing that. But it doesn't seem to me that Africa, if indeed it is possible to have one seat representing the whole continent, knows what to do with that seat at the G20. Is that true?
Thank you very much, moderator. I'll come to that question at the end of my presentation. Let me join everyone here to thank the organizers of this dialogue. We need many more of such dialogues to give content and traction to the whole movement called the Global South. Now, I like the imagery that has been chosen for this session, which is a phoenix. The phoenix is a legendary bird. The legend says after 500 years, it decays and then it begins to resurrect. So maybe the Global South has had its day, the 500-year decay period, and now it's resurrecting. And the question is, to what ends, and how should the world now respond to this rising phoenix? Now, I like to be historical and chronological. This is the context within which I think it's best to look at the kinds of possibilities in the opening new world. Now, when the Global South, then known as the Third World, emerged in the 1960s, 1950s, and so on, it was into a world that was greatly polarized, a world that was waiting to get the new world up for peaks. You either join this or you join that. And the Global South at the time was very tactical and strategic, immediately recognizing its place in human history. It says, we're not going to be drawn to the right or to the left. We would rather focus on a middle of the road, trajectory, which gave birth to the non-aligned movement. And this was, actually very positivist, because it was not non-aligned in terms of not being pro-West or being pro-East, but saying we want to do what we want on our own terms, and that's positive neutrality. And you would find that the first generation of Global South leaders very, very astutely complied with the kinds of imperatives that came with such a decision. Now, move over 60 years after that and come to the present situation. The world is a little different. We've moved from the end of history, as the philosopher told us, when we had the whole world under the captivity of neoliberalism and unipolarity, to a world that is beginning to open up and create many centers of power. So today we talk multipolarity, but we also recognize that the Global South is again at the point where we were 60 years ago, namely that there is an emerging Cold War in a different name, and that the world is now again in the recesses of, would you join the right or would you join the left? The difference this time, however, is that the Global South is now more conscious of its very delicately balancing role in the new world. And therefore, it's no longer just simply positive neutrality and non-alignment. It is simply saying we also have a role to play. Now, but how is the Global South going to be able to play that role? Many think that the Global South is still very divided. And how would those divisions work out? Now, this Global South must recognize, the opportunities that immediately present themselves. The whole notion of state fragility is a Global South phenomenon. Now, but you find that state fragility is a global responsibility in which, if left to the so-called superpowers the way we have known them, would never find any solution. So state fragility is a challenge for the Global South to confront. It must deal with it. Second is, many of these fragile states are not in a position to help themselves, and therefore they must depend on external help. If that external help is not going to become the basis for a new battleground, such as we have found in many parts of Africa, then the Global South must wake up and have many of those things done. But how? I would suggest that Global South coalitions, very strong regional organizations, should take their rightful place in dealing with matters that in Africa we say the time has come for Global South solutions to Global South problems. We're not going to wait for distant solutions, from people who are only interested in us joining A or B. Now, how do you strengthen that kind of capacity? You have to also industrialize. And many of the fragile states in the Global South are de-industrializing and not industrialized at all. So the champions of the Global South in the industrial calibration must give traction to the rest of the Global South, through what, if you like, you can call benevolent industrialization, Global South style. The Global South also has to strengthen its intra-Global South trading capacities. Now, in Africa, there is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement that makes Africa the largest market in the whole world. Now, that's the kind of model that the Global South should pursue. The Global South is not going to get the traction if all of its trade remains with unequal exchanges, with the West and the rest of the world. The Global South has to do more for itself. Of course, I recognize that underlying all of this, the Global South must have a consciousness of being together, and that requires coalition building everywhere it is to be found. And the multilateral organizations present the platform for doing this. The Global South is very clear that the United Nations needs to be democratized. The United Nations needs to open up to Global South increased representation. The Security Council itself must be democratized, and the Global South must have a larger say in the affairs of the United Nations. What is true of the United Nations is true of the Bretton Woods institutions, and the Global South must provide financial alternatives, viable alternatives to these kinds of centers. The Global South cannot deal with problems of a universal nature except it finds itself within them. And that's the way to go for, say, climate change. Climate change is not going to have its traction in the Global South except the Global South contextualizes those issues and begins to say, hey, wait a minute, we have our own ways that are self-determined for dealing with these issues. Now, let me respond to the question about Africa's membership of the G21. Now, for many people, Africa is a single unit, which is just as well. I mean, how many times would you find the United States of America, I say I come from Nigeria, they say, oh, well, how's my friend in Mozambique? And they have to be reminded that Africa is so diverse. Mozambique is not Nigeria. We're all part of Africa. Now, that immediately begins to tell you that to get a lone voice for Africa is a good thing because Africa teaches the world how to build coalitions and how to speak with one voice, what in South African cultural phraseology we call Ubuntu. Ubuntu is what makes all Africa one. But still, the point in that membership is that it offers Africa now an opportunity to gain the traction of consultation and participation because that's the strength that Africa has. So it's not -1, it's a strong +1 because Africa has said, for instance, if you're going to have an African representation, if you're going to have an African seat in the United Nations, we don't want individual African countries to be consulted and to be brought in from the outside. Give that role to the African Union. We have the capacity to determine who would have that seat. So in the G20, which is now G20 plus 1, the world will there learn that from the global south represented by Africa, there's a lot that we need to learn about doing things and working together. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. So to our next panelist, Guadalupe Dona, who is a professor and researcher in political science at the Universidad Torcanto di Tella in Argentina. Welcome.
Thank you very much. We are flipped in the chart, so this is me over here. So thank you very much for allowing me to share some thoughts in this very distinguished panel. It's been an honor to have been invited. So when I was first invited to participate in this panel, my reaction was, how can my data-driven public policy background actually help in this discussion? And it took me a while to get this idea emerged, but I believe that when it did, I found it really compelling. So let me just share it with you. So the first thing that came to my mind, and I'm sure that many of us have this thing in our mind, and many of my esteemed colleagues have touched on this thing, is that a new global order needs to tackle the incredible injustices that are going on in our region. So just to tell you, I live in Argentina. It's a country that has been in democracy for the last 40 years. We have not been hit by great climate change or great climate change things going on in my country. And even though we have 7 out of 10 children below the age of 18 living in poverty. That's 7 out of 10. This is a statistic that is really sad. Of course, the stories behind these statistics are even sadder. I'm sure that everyone here knows their own sad statistics, and we know that we cannot go without doing things about these terrible inequalities. So that's the first thing that I would say this new global order will actually need to address. But of course, I'm not saying with this that we don't have to think about economic progress. Of course not. Economic progress is what makes the pie as big as possible, and the bigger the pie, the bigger the slice of that pie that goes to those most in need. We know that that slice, the bigger it is, the greater the good it can make, and it's still not big enough. But what's more important is that we don't know what's the impact of that small slice going into those in need. So this is where I think that my background, and I think that data can have a very powerful voice. So it's where I think that we can actually think about data as a very great ally to help us navigate these great inequalities. Because like it or not, data shows us pure, simple truth, impartial way of showing the truth, a way that is politically unbiased. So by harnessing data, let me tell you 3 things that we can do with data. First, we can identify our present inequalities with precision, something that we don't even know. 2, we can target interventions for our very limited resources. And 3, most importantly, we can measure and we can have the impact to know what actually does the things that we are doing, and we can adjust in consequence. So advancing an evidence-based agenda seems kind of obvious once put it this way, right? It's like, it's the way forward. We have to do evidence-based policymaking because it's the way to learn what is good and what is going to the people most in need. If we are getting from every dollar, every drum, every peso that we are spending, the objectives that they are looking up to. But I have to tell you that after 15 years of trying to push this agenda, I have found a lot of difficulties. There's a lot of problems trying to push this agenda. Resistance to change, lack of resources, fear of what the data can reveal, all hinder progress in this area. I was glad to be yesterday in a panel on digital public infrastructure. If you have not been there, I really encourage you to look for the speakers there because I feel that there's a huge prospect in those areas. This public digital infrastructure has the potential to shrink the leakages that go to welfare systems, which is huge for countries like us that have so limited resources. just wonderful. Just look for those people. There's a great deal of things going on there. So, but we in the world still don't have this digital infrastructure going on. And in the meanwhile, let me tell you that while information can be challenging, can be expensive, might demand political will to act upon, it can actually be not that difficult. So let me share just 2 projects I'm actually currently working on to show the impact that we can have when we use data in the right way. First, we are trying to detect early signs of abuse and neglect in children. What we are doing is trying to see if we can find out of drawings that children do at school early signs of maltreatment and abuse. This is figures that fly very low under the radar. It's very difficult to know what's the actual numbers out there, but it is estimated that sexual abuse, it's prevalent for like 18% of girls and 8% of boys. Those are figures that are heartbreaking, and the actual kids that get into the protection system is a very tiny fraction of those. So if we can actually have a way of detecting these early signs of neglect and abuse, we can target very early interventions that are timely, that are locally based, and that can actually break these cycles of abuse. So this is a project we're going through, which has this potential to detect these early childhood early signs of neglect and abuse, and which is read by an algorithm. So algorithms are trained to try and see what the signs in these drawings are, which makes it really cost-effective. It's a really cost-effective way of having this data that is so incredibly important for public policy. Second example, so we are mapping informal settlements. So you might know that there are around 1 billion people nowadays living in these informal settlements. Most of these, if not all, are in our global south. These informal settlements have this nature, this very dynamic nature. They grow, they densify, they expand, and knowing where they are and how they grow, it's very difficult. It's a very expensive way of getting this data. What we are doing, and we are not pioneers in this, so there are many other people doing it in Africa, it's a great deal. We're using satellite imagery, high-resolution satellite imagery, which are free for use. And we are also training an algorithm that allows you to detect these informal settlements, and what's more important, they allow you to see how they grow in real time. This is an impressive thing to have as a policymaker. Urban developers, people that are targeting things for those most in need. It's data that is out there, it's not that complicated, and it's, of course, great to have. So we can harness what technology has to bring us, and if you ask me, I envision a world where we don't only rise in economic rankings, but that where we actually create a more global and just economy for us all, where we can actually measure the impact of every dollar, every dram, every peso that goes to those most in need, and what's more importantly, that we have the courage and the political will to act upon those data. So that was my compelling argument. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our final panelist is Nada Al-Hajiri, who is the president of the Yemen Information Center. Please go away.
Thank you. Allow me to start by thanking Samir and the ORAF team for inviting me, along with MFA Armenia. It's a pleasure to be here. I think there's an acknowledgement in this panel that the concept of the global south as a concept is analytically flawed, and yet we still use it. It's still here, and it's becoming even more popular. And I think this is a reflection of the times that we live in, because analysts are rightly saying that there's a return to the Cold War dynamics. And the problem with looking at the world like that is that you look at the world through a purely realist framework. And that means that you're looking at everything in terms of great power competition, and the dynamics in the global south and the richness of our history and our culture gets lost in the mix. And I want to say that Samir yesterday offered us a very interesting framework for thinking about the global south. Let's, for a moment, or for the purposes of this panel also, consider thinking about it as a collection of or emerging and developing countries taking back their identities. And I think that's really, really important, because what we want to do is to counter the narratives about our countries, and they're oftentimes negative. And through the work that I do at Yemen Information Center, one of our primary objectives is to offer an alternative perspective than what dominates the news and what dominates the world about Yemen. Everyone thinks about Yemen in the through the lens of the conflict that it's experiencing. But Yemen is much more than that. It has so much history, so much culture, so many youth who are willing and able to contribute to their country, to the world, and we need to build their capacity. We need to think about training them, but also we need to think about presenting and highlighting positive examples from the world and from Yemen, so that we can all talk together, which is why I liked also the panel yesterday, the very last one on multicultural dialogue. And I think we really, really need that, because yesterday I heard a lot of people say there's a lack of mutual respect. And when we think about this term, the lack of mutual respect, that means that diplomacy doesn't have, the enabling environment that it needs to have to be productive. And so another example I want to share is that, the Global South has shown an ability to collaborate on global issues like climate change, counterterrorism, AI, and global pandemics. These are global challenges that no one country can tackle alone. And so we need to think about really focusing on, avenues for collaboration, which is why continuing to think about the world in global south, global north terms is problematic. It kind of adds this divisive, confrontational approach to addressing problems. And I'll give you an example. For example, when we talk about reform of multilateral institutions, oftentimes it's the West pitted against the rest, and it couldn't be further away from the truth. It is reform of multilateral institutions is not about only, countries around the world having representation. It's about the massive dysfunction that is taking place in these institutions that are, no longer being effective in the work that they're doing. And so I like India's approach to talking about or advocating for reform, because they engage the West. They say we need reform, we need a place, we need to be represented, but also not discounting the need to continue to engage with Western countries. And I think I'll wrap it up here.
Well, I think the question of the Global South has important, or rather resonates with people who are sort of very, very significant identity. And so while I agree with Nada that it's analytically problematic, very, very problematic, even if you come to the African continent especially, but I think, in my view, it's a very useful, quote-unquote, weaponized word for signaling certain things about what part of the world feels excluded, generally. And I think that's for that reason we need to actually labor a little bit more to give it either an alternative term, but I don't know that it's acquired an identity of its own, and that'll be really, really difficult. So that's one. The second thing that I think, if you're going to talk about a new global order, and remember our title here is about the phoenix rising. The world as a whole and the global south, to use that term advisedly, perhaps the world needs to ask ourselves, if you're talking about the global order, then we need to define problems together. And when you define problems together, it is then possible to rank them. Because one of the other problems I have with the global south is it's a whole basket full of things. And we understand that regardless of where the world is today, there's a scarcity of anything. Attention, scarcity of resources. And so which ones come to the top, or which will be resolved, will depend on, quote unquote, the global south working with the alternative, or whoever the other side is, to actually create a hierarchy of what the questions should be, and then sitting together to ask them. So that comes to my second question for each of you. I know we need to come to the audience, but I'll ask each of you to comment on this. If I were to rank these things, what do you think are the priority global public goods in which an alternative perspective or just the voices of global south would be? And I think one of them is reform of global institutions. I think that's clear, both in terms of numbers, identity, and their role. I think institutions are dysfunctional, not because they are, quote unquote, managed by what identities, but just because the world has moved, and obviously the original functioning, the original conceptualization needs to be rejigged. So I think about this as global public goods. I'm not too sure which ones would be, but I think global peace is one. The second one would be global poverty. I think that's important. Of course, we have the SDGs on course. It's very, very clear that by 2030, I think we'll miss some of those targets. Reform of international institutions, and of course, the question of climate change. The one I am not too clear about, and I'm not being cynical here, is I don't know how the global south will gain anybody's respect, because respect can be demanded, right? It's about persuading people to think that respect would emerge over time on the basis of performance, on the basis of repeated conversation. So if we are to rank these four, global public goods, climate change, global poverty, or poverty in general, and reform of multilateral institutions, what am I missing from this list that you might add? And I'll start here again, go around the other way, and hope that by the time we have each spent a minute or two on that, we'll go to the audience.
First of all, I would like to thank all the panelists for their views expressed. It's a really interesting discussion, and I learned a lot from this exchange. I would add, answering to your question, I would add security, because that is the environment that creates possibility for everything else to happen. Although it's not the panacea for everything, but that is the dimension that the countries find mutual respect and mutual also common ground where they can share their problems, share their concerns, and to create an environment where all the other problems can be solved in a timely manner. Although I completely agree with the notion that this generalization of every time you make a generalization, it creates some other issues with finding more specific notions of what is happening. So, and in this case as well, and this is why I said that in my view, what is happening in the world system is a creation of a constellation of a constellar system that is actually countries, bigger, middle, smaller, and all of them depending on each other. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. What about you?
In addition to whatever has been said by my previous speakers, I would put healthcare as another priority, because COVID is not the last pandemic, especially new kind of viruses coming from animal origin to human, like the latest incidences of monkeypox, will put a new challenge. And most of the people who will be affected by this will be people from Global South. So we need to have advanced preparedness and the solutions, both in terms of prevention as well as diagnosis and therapy about such kind of upcoming epidemics and pandemics, and to have effective management of the same.
Thank you. I think the most all-encompassing has to be security. Security because, you know, all of the other things come within a secure framework. Poverty, of course, is critical. It's underlying, you know, all of the problems. You know, if you have a critical mass of poor people, there's very little progress that can be made. But you need security. And I think that the greatest problem, arguably, in the Global South today is the fact that people don't have security, and therefore they migrate from their countries, they get displaced, you know, they get thrown out all over the world, and that exposes them to all the other things that we'll talk about. But give security, I'm sure that poverty can be addressed within that framework. Pandemics can be better addressed and so on. But where there's no security, it is very difficult to address these other dimensions.
So, of course, I agree with all that you have already said, but if I have to add something, I think I would add cultural heritage. I think that one thing that it's really important is that we preserve the very particular nature of our culture, which I think it's really distinguishable from what we see like in the hegemonic powers now. I have this deep feeling that here in the Global South, we are more united to our communities, united to our families, have a less individualistic sense of being. I might be wrong. It's something that data has not been, I have not been able to crunch the numbers around this idea, but I believe that there's something very important that can actually make our societies really resilient. So, and I think that that is ingrained in our cultural ways of going. So I think that I would add that to the list, yes.
Thank you, and I would like to echo what everyone said. I do agree with everyone, but I would also say that they're all, perhaps security is important, but I think everything's interlinked. And more important is the attitudes by which we approach these global issues. We have to let go of the you're either with us or against us perspective when we engage in dialogue, when we engage in collaboration, because without that, we're not going to reach, it's going to be a deadlock every time.
All right, so you've heard from our fine panelists. I'll take 3 questions from the audience. So this is all that's required. Please state your name, and if you have a question to a specific panelist, I'd be glad to hear it. And I'd prefer as well, just as we have gender balance on the podium, to have at least 2 questions from ladies and 2 from gentlemen. So I'll start at the end with the gentleman already holding the microphone. He's hijacked the dispensation. I will submit to you for that. Yes, please go ahead. Not more than 2 minutes, please.
Yeah. Good morning. First of all, thank you very much, all the distinguished panelists, for educating us with your views, articulated with so much of clarity and conviction. I have a very small observation and a very brief question. My observation is that, you know, today's Global South, the Global South of 2024 is much different from the third world countries of the 50s and 60s. The qualitative difference is that today, amongst the Global South, we have a large number of countries which are at very high stage of development, fastest emerging economies. In short, the voice of Global South today is much stronger and in a position to shape the global agenda. So in this backdrop, I would like to have your views, distinguished panelists. Is the time right to create a formal institutional framework for Global South, or is it premature? Otherwise, we will keep discussing, deliberating, and forgetting. Go back home, and the matter is over. Thank you.
Thank you very much. One other hand? Right here, at the front.
Manish Chand, the Center for Global India Insights and India Rights Network. I want to bring the panel back to the notion of competition and contest for the leadership of the Global South. What was stated was an ideal situation, that there should not be. It was more a statement, an idealistic statement. But in reality, beneath the veneer of solidarity and all that, you could sense undercurrents of competition and rivalry. So major South countries, so-called, China especially has launched a charm offensive to quote Global South, Africa. Brazil itself is positioning, and G20 presidency is a classic example. And India has hosted 3 editions of the Voice of South Summit. So I'd like a more realistic appraisal that is this competition for real, and what does it mean for the Global South going forward? And one very brief question to the speaker from Nigeria, Mr. Osagi. The inclusion of African Union in G20, what has it meant to Africa on the ground? Or what difference would it make, tangible difference? Thank you.
Well, I provided an opportunity for 4 questions, 2 from ladies. It looks like they've seeded that. Oh, yeah, right at the front. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Just to make up the gender balance, I'm Anna Shiko, the ambassador of Hungary to the region, Georgia and Armenia. You said last that we need to address the us and them problem first and actually be open. We see a new bloc formation everywhere happening in the world. And we know in the last 100 years how blocs and how Cold War, etc., actually stopped connectivity. I wonder how you see the future of connectivity from the south to the north in the upcoming years. Thank you.
All right, we'll take this final one. Thank you.
Hello, Jay Kansara from the United States, Washington, D.C. Right now we're having a presidential debate, campaign, and one of the key topics is immigration, where immigration from what is the global south to our country, and many on the right, you've used the epithet, when you import the third world, you become the third world. So contextualizing that with this conversation, how do we reconcile that there are imbalances of power in the economies of scale, in the cultural differences, with the aspirations of these countries and their objectives to bring development, etc., into their own economies. So perhaps the Deputy Minister and even Mr. Chotaiwale and anyone who wants to answer this could.
All right, I'm conscious we only have 12 minutes, so what I'll do is I'll ask each of our panelists, starting from the back with you, Nada, any of the comments and your final remarks as you come up.
Thank you. Maybe I'll take that question. So in my view, the creation of blocs, especially by the Global South, is a statement more than it is anything else. So they see that they've been saying, we want to be included in these major multilateral institutions. We want to be included in the larger financial, economic prosperity that's happening in the world, but they're not given the avenues, or maybe they have very the requirements to join are very difficult, so they're attracted to these different blocs that enable them to have a voice and maybe to have to expand their reach. Granted, now having separate blocs is not useful, because you can't create a bloc for everything that you couldn't join. At the same time, it's whatever you think of, for example, the creation of the BRICS. Whatever you think of it, some people think it's a great sign, it's a danger to the Western-led world order. Some people think it's not really effective, it's not going to be useful. I see it as a signal by the Global South. Our voices are not heard. We want better packages, better ability to integrate into your system. And I think if the incentives is there, they wouldn't even have to think about creating these alternative structures. We hear about countries signaling that they want to join the BRICS, I think almost every year. And so it's not going away, it's there. It's almost like countries using the BRICS to make a statement. We are here, we want to be taken seriously. We want to be recognized in our ability to influence the world. And on connectivity specifically, and I heard this mentioned in some of the panels as well yesterday, unfortunately we live in a world where information and connectivity are being weaponized. So it links to security, it links to how we think about the collective security of the world. How do we want to think about approaching our differences and putting them aside or resolving them so that we can find some mutual space to cooperate and collaborate?
So I'm just passing by the question because I'm also interested to know what Africa has to gain from this joining in the G20. So I skip my line and let you speak.
Well, first, I think, the concern that has been raised here is how to move the global south from an idea to a proper movement, if you like. Can we think of institutionalizing the global south? The first question to ask is, the global south within the larger context of most possibly a global north, what are the institutional representations of a global north? I think that the global south, is an ideological movement. It's a recognition of a difference, of a diverse world, the one that says we are not going to be led only by, what comes from one part of the world. We also want to be heard. So the whole essence is there must be room for 1,000 flowers to blossom, and that the 1,000 flowers must include the global south. Now, I think that organizations like BRICS and so on already exist. And the mandate looks like a global south mandate, even though that has not been democratically arrived at. The point is, we'll need to have some kind of rallying center, for this whole idea to carry it forward. We must move from an awareness of being global south to a consciousness of being global south. The difference between being aware and being conscious being that when you are conscious, it becomes the basis for your action beyond just being aware. So I hope that, that kind of traction, can be developed. Now, competition and rivalry, unfortunately, these are not things we can run away from. In the global south, just like in the global north. But if we're going to borrow any examples from the global north, it must be that the big leaders in the global south must be benevolent. They must, have the responsibility bestowed on that kind of relationship, of that kind of status that they have. In Africa, certainly Nigeria is a big player, and Nigeria has historically lived up to the responsibilities of being a big brother, on the continent. So India must, China must. Now, the way that the global south, can prove to be different is, we are not simply about exploiting, differences and inequalities. We have certain values. The Indians express those values, the Chinese express those values that make us different. And I think the point about being culturally, together, those things are important. The African Ubuntu must come into this. I think that, rivalry and competition, the way we understand those terms are not, winner takes all. They are not zero-sum, they are not, exploitative and so on. We must do that. I talked about the need to have a global south network of industrialization, for instance. There has to be industrialization led by these champions We have to have common markets. We have to trade more within the global south than we are trading, with the rest of the world. Those things have to happen. And I think that if we are all led, by those kinds of values that differentiate us as culturally disciplined people from the rest of the world, we have a lot to teach the world. And that's the point, about the global south culture. So I agree that we must also emphasize the things that make us different from the rest of the world. And for Africa, I think that if the G20 is regarded as one of the more active platforms for multilateral interactions, so it would be for Africa. BRICS, what do these things mean? They just are new alternatives to the other platforms that don't seem to be working well. So the G20 brings together the world's biggest economies. Why not? Africa is also there now that we have the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and Africa is there. We must take an active part, in all of those vistas and new ventilations that exist in the changing world. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll be quick. First, on the immigration debate, I don't want to go into the domestic politics of US, but to say that the third world, if you get immigrants from third world country, you will become third world is actually a misnomer, because the person whom himself has asked is immigrant or his parents were immigrants. And they have actually contributed significantly, those immigrants going from India to US economy. So how much immigrants to take is always a question of debate, but immigration per se cannot be stopped, and it is, on the contrary, healthier trend for overall global progress and development. As far as institutionalization is concerned, I think it is premature because there are already several institutes, and many of the members of the Global South are already participating and leading in those institutes. Also, countries like India are also being invited to forums like G7, which is not mostly all by developed countries. So I think right now creating another institution for the Global South may not be very useful. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go point by point. Firstly, if there is a change, and we all agree on that, there is a consensus about that, it should be reflected in the global institution. That's a no-brainer, I think. And how is it going to be reflected? The best way is to reform the ones that we have already. On a second point, there was a statement that Global South not having leaders is idealistic. But it also, I would like to say that a same kind of idealism is that these poles or the powerhouses are going to be, the sole leaders of this development. Because, as I said, the middle countries, the small countries, all of these countries have interests. We are developing in the same pace along different dimensions, technology, for example. So I think that the interests of the middle and small countries will affect the situation, so that these so-called poles or the powerhouses in this system have to share their public good, have to bring some public good into the picture to be leaders in this system. About the connectivity, north to south, or I would probably say global east to global west, and the whole region, our viewpoint and our initiative of crossroad of peace speaks for itself. So we feel this need acutely in terms of economic and trade. And this is actually one of the areas where trade and economy come as a priority. And this is where the need to stabilize the situation in the world, in the region, comes from. And also I would like to comment on the question on immigration. In last years, Armenia has seen a movement of nationals from India for labor here in Armenia. So luckily, culturally, we don't have any issue with that, because our peoples know each other and are familiar with each other from centuries ago. But institutionally, we felt the need to make additional regulations, because there were some issues on the daily lives of these laborers here in Armenia. So we have created actually a working group to deal with these issues, and I believe the countries that are in need of labor immigration should have these institutions in place before this happens, so that not to have all these spillover effects. Thank you.
I know we need to break. I'll close with 3 points. So if you ask me what I've learned today, I think, or rather, the best way to think about it is for you to define common problems, and whether the global south, whichever way you call it, global south and the alternative. I think the global south has to be careful about whether its leaders or its communications instrumentalizes grievances of low-income countries, because that would be further polarizing. I think what they need to do is to close that gap. I'm not too sure that some of the rhetoric I've heard, not here, but out there, actually helps in that. So a consciousness in that leadership is essential. I also think that they could concentrate on global public goods, global security, reducing state fragility, which is a specific problem, especially in the African continent, and obviously in other parts of the world that call themselves. Africa needs to justify, through the AU, its G20 accession. And I think, so that it doesn't look like a symbolic one. I think there's already generating quite a lot of cynicism on the African continent. This is the usual cynicism. And the final one is, I am incorrigible multilateralist. And one of the things that I think, again, global south countries need to be conscious about is, just as more global south professionals and institutions and ideas are being called into the space to inform global policy or international political economy, we should be clear that global south assertion does not shut that door. But the most important thing is, I think the global south could do some homework or assignment around making its claims more coherent. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to the panel. Ladies and gentlemen, the next panel will be in the white room, which is one floor below, as will be the rest of the panels for the day. So please make your way to